There are questions you were trained not to ask. This is the paper trail behind one of them. Remote microwave weaponry. Documented, patented, presented to the European Parliament, hidden in plain sight, until a records officer sent the wrong file to a journalist. This is Damage Control, and this is the story of the attachment. Curtis Waltzman was a journalist at MuckRock, a non-profit that files freedom of information requests at scale and publishes whatever comes back. In 2017, he launched a project to track what every DHS-connected fusion center in America was doing about domestic terror groups like Antifa and various supremacy groups. He'd filed dozens of these requests. A fusion center, if you're not familiar, is a post-9/11 intelligence hub, state-owned but federally supported through the Department of Homeland Security. There are roughly 80 across the states. Their job is to gather threat intelligence, analyze it locally, and feed back to the national security apparatus. The mandate is deliberately wide: counterterrorism, organized crime, cybersecurity, and extremism. In 2018, Waltzman's request to the Washington State Fusion Center came back with the usual material: briefings, memos, analytical summaries, and one file that had no business being there: EM effects on human body.zip. Inside were diagrams with murky odd sources. One traced to a software engineer named Supratik Saha, most probably a contractor, another to a defunct fringe website whose domain had already lapsed. The content described psychoelectronic weapons, electromagnetic signals inducing auditory sensations, visual disruption, remote brain mapping, voices transmitted directly into the skull. Some of it tracks with real acknowledged technology. The Pentagon's active denial system, a millimeter wave heat ray mounted on a Humvee, has been publicly demonstrated since 2007. It fires a 95 GHz beam that heats the surface of your skin to the point where you physically can't stand still. That's real. That exists. Other diagrams describe effects consistent with what the US diplomats reported in Havana starting in 2016. Auditory disruption, headaches, cognitive impairment, all triggered by some kind of directed energy that nobody has taken credit for. Then a third diagram takes it somewhere else. It lays out electromagnetic mind control routed through mobile phone networks, signals broadcast from towers, from the ground, from the air, targeting individuals based on what it calls a unique bioelectromagnetic field. This is almost word for word the language which would later get laundered through Facebook groups and repackaged as the 5G conspiracy. That didn't come from nowhere, it came from somewhere. Maybe it came from a file like this. Are these pitched documents for developmental technology or threat assessment material an analyst pulled together to understand what a foreign adversary might be developing? Waltzman published it. His tone was careful. Then DHS called MuckRock and asked them to remove the department's name from the article. Not a correction, not a denial, a request to be distanced from it. An internal email later confirmed the file was sent by mistake. A records officer apologized. Why was the Fusion Center holding JPEGs on mind control? And why did they get tied with perceived terror groups? And what were those diagrams doing on the same servers as domestic terror briefings? Do you remember the media fiasco that surrounded the 5G towers around the same time the COVID story was breaking out? I have this feeling that when a media takes a story and drills it to death, it's kind of like a shaming ritual. They so desperately want to discourage and make a mockery of the people talking about it that it goes a bit far and it looks odd. It starts to make you question and think, hey, there might actually be something here. Like when the BBC released the "No, UK weather is not being manipulated" article some months after the Dubai floods caused by cloud seeding. Well, the media reported the 5G towers originally as the go-to example of dangerous misinformation, the gold standard of crazy. The story they kept telling people was simple. A handful of lunatics on Facebook think 5G towers cause COVID. People are literally setting them on fire, and isn't that just embarrassing? Over 50 towers were torched in the UK alone. Engineers were physically attacked on their job over 80 times, and the official response was almost comically swift. The NHS medical director called it dangerous nonsense. And the European Commission issued emergency statements. YouTube rewrote its entire content policy within 5 days to remove anything linking 5G to COVID. And Facebook and government ministers lined up to publicly shame anyone who even asked questions. Only, when you look at what people were actually saying, it wasn't all "towers give you corona." Some people were asking sensible questions, like if 5G frequencies overlap with documented military crowd control weapons, why is that never mentioned? Why did governments rush to silence the conversation before any independent safety studies on 5G neurological effects were ever completed? And why were the towers being installed during lockdowns? The media never really engaged with those questions. They just kept showing you the same burned towers and photos of unhinged Facebook obsessives, and that seemed really odd. Because those questions don't come from nowhere, they came from the voices the media chose not to include in their stories. Before any of this became a meme, two people were already trying to have this conversation. The first was Nick Begich, son of an Alaskan congressman, twice elected president of the Alaskan Federation of Teachers, not a fringe figure by background. In 1995, he co-authored a book called Angels Don't Play This HAARP, a detailed examination of the US military research program in Alaska, jointly funded by the Air Force, the Navy, and DARPA, that used high-frequency radio waves and heat to manipulate the ionosphere. The military said it was atmospheric research. Begich said, read the patents. He compiled a catalogue of real registered searchable US patents, devices for inducing specific brainwave patterns, methods for changing human behavior using electromagnetic fields, apparatus for modulating brain signals through external magnetic energy, filed through the 1980s and into the 1990s, assigned to real companies, granted by the US Patent Office. Patents are admissions. You can't patent something that doesn't work, or at least something you haven't demonstrated works. These weren't theoretical, they were documented. In 1998, Begich was invited to present his findings to the European Parliament's Security and Disarmament Subcommittee. He demonstrated voice-to-skull technology live, sound transmitted directly into a person's head via electromagnetic signal. The source was external. The sound was perceived as internal. The European Parliament passed a formal resolution calling for a ban on weapons capable of manipulating the human nervous system. NATO refused to participate in the debate. They stated efficiently that they had no policy on the deployment of such weapons. That resolution is still on record. You can read it. The second person was Robert Duncan, and this story is harder to verify, which is either the most suspicious thing about it or exactly what you'd expect. Duncan claims degrees from Harvard and Dartmouth, claims to have worked as a contractor for the CIA, the Department of Defense, DARPA, and NATO on artificial intelligence and neural interface projects. He claims to have stumbled onto the civilian targeting program accidentally, while developing reverse MRI systems designed to inject electromagnetic signals into the brain for virtual reality applications. He couldn't stay quiet about what he found. In 2006, he published a book called The Matrix Deciphered, and in 2010, Project Soulcatcher, self-published. His central claim is something he calls EEG heterodyning, the idea that a person's unique electromagnetic brain signature can be identified, locked onto remotely, and then interfered with. Signals layered onto existing neural patterns, not overriding the brain from the outside, mixing it from within. Which immediately raises eyebrows at the Fusion Center file, because inside that accidental government disclosure was a diagram describing exactly this. A bioelectromagnetic field which is unique for every human body. Not Duncan's language, a diagram on the Department of Homeland Security's server, filed alongside domestic terror briefings, released by accident in 2018. What he claims he did next is either brave or delusional, depending on how much you trust the rest of the story. He says he interviewed over 200 people reporting identical experiences. Voices, intrusive thoughts, physical sensations with no external cause. He says he gave videotaped testimony to senators and members of Congress. He says 2 FBI agents came to him privately and confirmed the program existed. He doesn't just make claims, he describes mechanisms, he describes technologies, he explains in technical language how the system he describes would actually function. The signal processing, the neural architecture, the specific brain regions involved, the counter techniques a target might use to disrupt the interference. Right or wrong, that level of specificity is unusual. It either means he knows what he's talking about, or is very good at making it sound like he does. Two men, one with a paper trail of government documents and a live demonstration before Parliament, one with unverifiable credentials and a highly specific technical framework that nobody has officially confirmed or officially denied. Neither of them were talking about COVID, neither of them mentioned 5G by name. They were talking about the infrastructure, the mechanism, the idea that electromagnetic signals and human neurology are not as separate as we've been told. And then 5G arrived and the towers went up, and suddenly that conversation, the specific documented decades-old conversation, became something you're not allowed to have. 5G's millimeter wave frequencies, running between 24 and 71 GHz, sit in the same band as the Pentagon's active denial system, which operates at 95 GHz and is classified as a directed energy weapon. Unlike previous generations of mobile networks which broadcast in all directions, 5G uses phased array antennas containing up to 1,000 elements that generate narrow, steerable beams, tracking individual devices, focusing energy in a specific direction, adjusting in real time. The same beamforming architecture that makes your phone faster is, at an engineering level, the same underlying technology that is used to concentrate electromagnetic energy onto a target. So let's talk about where this technology actually stands right now, not in classified programs, in the public record. In January 2024, Noland Arberg became the first human to receive a Neuralink implant. Paralyzed from the shoulders down, he can now control a computer, play chess, send emails, using thought alone. Synchron, backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, goes further, inserting their device through the jugular vein, no surgery required, threading it through the bloodstream until it sits beside the motor cortex, reading neural signals through the vessel wall. 10 patients are already using it. In April 2025, Precision Neuroscience received FDA clearance for a wafer-thin electrode array that slips between skull and brain tissue through a narrow slit. Commercially authorized, not experimental anymore. And that's the read side. The right side, delivering signals into the brain rather than just out of it, is in active military development. DARPA's N3 program has the stated goal of reading from and writing to brain tissue simultaneously, without surgery, using microwaves and magnetic fields passing through the skull. The target population is soldiers. The question isn't whether this technology exists, it's in humans. It's FDA cleared, it's on the DARPA website. The question is who controls it and what they consider a legitimate use case. Which brings us to one moment in recent history where direct microwave energy and neurological damage stopped being theoretical, and the government's response is telling. Starting in 2016, American diplomats in Havana began reporting directional sound, followed by vertigo, memory loss, and cognitive damage. It spread. China, Austria, Poland, a NATO summit in 2023, over 1,500 reported cases across 96 countries. CIA officers, FBI agents, State Department officials, their children. Watch the Sean Ryan episode 283. He interviews a Havana Syndrome survivor called AJ. It's chilling. The National Academies of Sciences, 19 independent medical experts commissioned by the State Department, concluded that in 2020, the most plausible cause was directed pulse radio frequency energy. Then, in 2023, 5 US intelligence agencies held a press conference and told the public that it was probably stress, environmental factors, pre-existing conditions, no details provided. A whistleblower complaint later confirmed the CIA had engaged in active suppression of witnesses and was deliberately withholding classified documents from other investigating agencies, including the FBI and Congress. Then, in 2024, a Norwegian scientist who had been openly skeptical built a microwave pulse device and pointed it at his own head to prove it was harmless. He developed neurological symptoms. The Pentagon traveled to Norway, then spent 8 figures requiring a second backpack-sized pulsed RF device through an undercover operation. They've been testing it for over a year, whilst their public position remains very unlikely. So the question isn't really whether the technology works, the question is why deny it? A few possibilities worth sitting with. Confirming the attack means confirming the technology. And then someone asks what Washington has been doing with its own directed energy program, the active denial system, the declassified non-lethal weapons documents, the Air Force patents for transmitting signals into the human skull. Those questions become very hard to contain. There's also the infrastructure problem. If a backpack-sized device with off-the-shelf components can cause measurable neurological damage to trained intelligence officers, then what does officially acknowledging that mechanism do to the conversation about civilian networks broadcasting pulsed frequencies at scale across residential areas? It doesn't make them the same thing, but it opens a door that's very hard to close again. Have you ever considered the framing of the stereotypical conspiracy nut? The one who's hearing voices in his head, unable to sleep, wearing the tinfoil hat. That image is so culturally embedded it's almost a reflex. Someone says they're hearing sounds that nobody else can hear, or that something is interfering with their thoughts, and the conversation is over before it starts. You're crazy, paranoid, bonkers. It's a remarkably effective tool. You don't need to argue the science, you don't need to produce counter-evidence, you just need the image. And the audience has already decided. The media knows this. Once that image is attached to a topic, serious people stop asking questions about it. Which, when you think about it, is an incredibly convenient outcome. Voice-to-skull, V2K, is the military's own term for transmitting sounds directly into a person's skull using pulsed microwave energy. No speaker, no headphones, nothing touching you at all. The US Army literally had it in their military thesaurus, defined as a non-lethal weapon using microwave transmission of sound into the skull, before it was quietly removed. The science was patented in 1974, demonstrated at the Walter Reed Army Institute in 1973, and when the Air Force filed their own disclosure form for the technology, you know what they listed as the first application? Psychological warfare. The Navy even funded a whole program called Medusa specifically to beam sounds into people's heads for crowd control. And here's the thing. Do you genuinely think the military spends decades developing technology like this and never once tests it on a real person? Because we already know what they do when nobody's watching. The CIA walked up to random members of the American public and dosed them with LSD without telling them, without their consent, for years. And we only found out about it because somebody forgot to shred the paperwork. So when you think of that movie, you know the one. The disheveled guy can't sleep, hearing voices nobody else can hear. Everyone around him thinks he's losing his mind. Maybe just sit on that for a second before you decide what's paranoia and what isn't. Because here's what happened when somebody actually submitted evidence of exactly that kind to the FBI. In January 2026, the US Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of material related to Jeffrey Epstein. Emails, photos, FBI memos, court records, and every tip ever submitted to the FBI by the public, verified or not. Buried in that release was a document most people scrolled past. A South Australian case file, apparently compiled by or on behalf of victims claiming government and military electromagnetic targeting, submitted to the FBI as evidence in connection with Jeffrey Epstein. The document describes radio transmitters used to interfere with people's central nervous systems, conditioning techniques designed to make targets experience tactile, auditory, and visual hallucinations. Victims, including children, experiencing nightmares, insomnia, extreme anxiety, and graphic imagery while sleeping. Symptoms that began on specific documented dates and left permanent psychological damage. And it states directly that this same technology was used to communicate with and harass Jeffrey Epstein while he was in prison. Unverified, a public tip, the DOJ said so explicitly. Now look at what the files show about what Epstein was actually funding. Researchers who built full-text search databases across 1.38 million PDFs found a consistent pattern emerging, a recurring thread about electronic and pharmaceutical means of mind control running through Epstein's tech investments. The files show academics proposing Epstein-funded projects, including a pleasure genome initiative exploring neural correlates of pleasure, and a genetics and brain laboratory for what they described as far-out ideas, including life extension. Separately, DOJ documents showed Epstein paid a Hong Kong academic $20,000 to find individuals with what he called X-Men-like abilities, including alleged mind control, and had plans to rebrand his private island for psychic research. A man simultaneously funding brain science, investing in surveillance infrastructure built by Unit 8200 veterans, an Israeli elite signals intelligence division. During the same year, DARPA was funding bidirectional neural interfaces, and the material boundary between electronics and human biology was dissolving in university labs. Think about what that would mean as a weapon of control. Not the island, the cameras or the footage, but a voice that speaks directly inside someone's head, indistinguishable from their own thoughts, delivered from the other side of the world. A senator in a committee room, a judge reviewing a case, a general weighing an order. And if they try to tell anyone, they sound insane. The weapon is silent, and their defense is non-existent. The mainstream media covered the celebrity names, the redaction failures. They pointed fingers at Russia of all people, whilst the EMF documents got almost no coverage at all. The sheer scale of the release, millions of pages, functions as its own form of informational management. Most people never get to the parts that matter. And then came the Iran war smokescreen, and that's where we are, a convicted trafficker who paid academics to find people with mind control abilities and wanted to rebrand his private island for psychic research. A Bill Gates-backed company threading devices through people's jugular veins to read their thoughts. A Norwegian scientist who practically proved microwave weapons by pointing it at his own head. And the Pentagon secretly spending 8 figures on a device it publicly says doesn't exist. Now, what would Epstein or the ignoble families he represents want with mind control technology? Probably something really kind and beneficial for the whole of humanity. Now put your phone down and go outside. The towers are perfectly safe. If this was worth your time, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from. Much more.